Welcome to this morning's panel on the economic benefits of good urbanism. Those who have heard me speak know that I frequently show pictures of this book, now written over 20 years ago but still in print. I take any excuse or opportunity to show it because if a few people decide to go out and buy the thing, it's no longer, they ran out of copies at the bookstore, but if you order them over the net, it'll help pay for my lunch. So that's an important... One of the reasons why I show it actually is a reminder that when I first got involved in this movement, my interest was really in design, physical design. In the course of researching the book, I traveled all over the country to the office of the various new urbanists, and I rifled through their drawers looking at images of different projects and studied block layout and building design and all the things that I was very interested in at the time. The last thing I ever imagined is that 20 years later I would be standing up giving talks about the economics of new urbanism and good urbanism. But in fact, my course of exploration has really taken me from the design of these places to begin to start looking at the implementation aspects, how we code them, how we regulate them, and ultimately to how they get approved within government and how they get financed. And so, as always, the old saying, follow the money, is applicable, and that's what I've done, is I followed the money. And the amazing thing is if I had done this 20 years earlier, I think the whole process would have been a lot easier, because there's a lot of people out there with the perception that new urbanism is more expensive and more difficult, and it can be more difficult, but from a municipal standpoint, it is way more lucrative. It makes a whole lot more sense for local government to be approving smart growth and new urbanist projects than it is for sprawl. And that's what you're going to be learning about over the next, how long do we have here? Till noon. Now, I have seen the PowerPoints. They're chock full of information, images, and detail. So we're all going to be talking very, very quickly, and I don't want to spend too much time on the intros. The bios of our esteemed speakers, I believe, are available on the web at the CNU website. But they're an amazing group. Some of us have actually just met for the first time physically this morning. Others of us have been presenting at different conferences and such. But we are going to start actually with design, with our first presentation from Galina Chacheva of Duany and Plater Zyberg, who's an expert on retrofitting the suburbs to follow the model that we're talking about. Our second speaker, Joe Minicosi, who is also comes from a design background, but with some real estate finance as well. Joe is becoming somewhat of a rock star on the speaking circuit in terms of this information, and you're going to see why this morning. He's taken this material that is, in many ways, should be dull and boring, and made it into a really compelling subject in terms of understanding the dollars and the cents. I'm going to then jump in as a third speaker, and my background is rather eclectic, but suffice to say, again, I don't come from an economist background, and probably the person who's the most qualified of all of us to actually speak on this heady subject, Michael Pagano, a professor at the University of Illinois, Chicago, who's going to talk to us about a really unique concept that I've been dying to bring to the Congress here, which is the notion of the spatialization of revenue. And I'll let him explain what that means in a few minutes. So with that, I'm going to move the, hopefully...
Are there any mechanisms where we can get the PowerPoints presented today?
You know, I'm not sure how management's dealing with that. I have a few copies of a New Urban News article that I'll be raffling off here later so that I can make up the gap between the book sales and my lunch. No, I'll be handing them out. I don't know.
Just give us your card.
Yeah, and I can also give you some key. I have my website or my email address on at the end of this, and I frequently send out copies of things in very old-fashioned technological form. So with that, I'm going to ask Galina to come to the stage. We're going to be timing each other. Again, I know all the talks are probably going to run long. We'll do our best. And the good news is we're right before lunch, so if Q&A spills into lunch, it won't be the end of the world. Oh, yeah, sorry, one more thing. Continuing education credits. Sorry, Galina. I'm supposed to let you know that this session has been approved for 1.25 AIA and 1.25 AICP continuing education credits. For AIA, please have attendees sign in at the back of the room, write your name and your AIA numbers clearly. AICP attendees, report your attendance online at planning.org/CM You can search event number 19209 for a list of all sessions and tours from CNU 20. Okay, and with that, Galina, I'm going to...
Good morning, everybody. All right. So we will be talking about the economic benefit of good urbanism, and I'm supposed to talk about design and good urbanism, and I'm going to start with sprawl. In our 2 decades of dealing with sprawl, we new urbanists invented a whole bunch of different terms. We call it repair sprawl, we call it retrofit sprawl, and now I'm going to throw in another one, which is occupy sprawl. So just to confuse everybody. But yesterday we had a great initiative, the sprawl retrofit initiative, which has been going for a while. We had a great meeting yesterday, and we came to the conclusion that actually a whole range of terms is not bad. You were not going to go out with a kind of a wholesale one-term campaign. It will be, we are going to try in a mean way to take over sprawl, with all terminology, with all terms we can use. Basically, I believe that this metaphor of occupation actually can serve us very well. Because as the very passionate occupiers of Wall Street wanted to basically shake up the system of Wall Street, kind of the whole society, this is exactly the way how we as urbanists want to shake up the foundations of sprawl, you know, from not only from the design point of view, you know, the settlement patterns, but also in terms of its regulatory framework and also in terms of its financing a kind of system which was supporting sprawl for so many years. And also, there is so much to occupy in sprawl. Just think about it, you know, the endless parking lots which are covering this country. Recently, there were like all these articles about how many square feet and how many thousands of square miles actually we have covered with asphalt. So these are places to occupy. We have empty and dying big boxes and malls. We have McMansions which are empty. So there is so much basically empty space to be occupied. So I'm taking a kind of this metaphor of occupation quite literally, you know, occupying it in the physical sense to some extent. And here I'm showing that this slide, which is actually I forgot to show a slide of my book, the Sprawl Repair Manual, but I did this immodest thing to put myself in this slide. This is an event which June Williamson and I were at in Lower Manhattan last year in October, and the very ironic thing was that we were talking about sprawl, its past, present and future, in one of the most urban places on the face of Earth, in Lower Manhattan, in the Bowery neighborhood. But it actually showed that sprawl as a kind of a pattern, as a way of growth and living is very central to our society. You know, we need to deal with it, and we have been as new urbanists for quite a while. So I had to actually cover why we need to do all of these things. Why do we need to repair or to retrofit, and then basically, and what to do. And then the economic benefits of all these retrofits will be covered by the other speakers. There are probably, I'm not going to go in detail about the whys, because we are actually buried in magnificent and numerous statistics about why we need to do that. But I'm just going to cover just like the 3 main drivers according to me. You know, the number one driver actually is our economy, which is like a post-recessional, and it will be bad for a long, long time. We know all of that. It is impossible to build the way we used to build. We're never going to return back to the same scale of expanding sprawl in our greenfields. Our commuters, you know, they're basically overstretched commuters, cannot pay their mortgages. Our municipalities cannot go and do the endless infrastructure, and you will see many of the comparisons which Joe Minicosi will show in terms of tax revenue. You know, it was like the myth of having big tax revenues if you just rely on suburban growth. And also the fact that the most foreclosures actually have happened in our exurbs, in our sprawling communities. And the major kind of mortgage crisis, actually, our sprawling communities were the epicenter of this. So, so that's one thing. The other one is, of course, the new demographics. It is not only about a kind of the market shift, you know, the baby boomers and the next generation, the generation Y. This is like a given. You know, we are not going to continue doing this for a long time because these people want more urban places. But it's also about pure numbers. We will be housing about 100 million people in the next couple of decades, most likely. And not only, we are not going to be able to fit them only in our downtowns and first-tier suburbs, but also in the second and third, which is basically going into our sprawling communities and doing things there. And then the third driver is basically the new attitude towards the environment, whether you believe in the climate change or not. Everybody knows that something is happening. We have pollution, you know, the waste of resources, water, etc. It's also a different attitude towards health. You know, we connect the physical design of sprawl with our health on all levels. And also with aging. You know, we're talking about smart aging. Everybody wants to retire and to live a kind of a connected life in a social place. So we cannot abandon sprawl, obviously, because there's such a big investment already, whether it's financial, you know, money invested, resources, but it's also human energy and human dreams. So we have to go and probably as planners, as architects and all other different specialists, we need to improve, upgrade, and rebalance the life of people who, we sometimes say that kind of they're stuck in sprawl to some extent, but we need to feel a kind of empathy for them and go forward. There is a hope, you know. Human settlements are very successional and resilient in nature, and they go through cycles of advancement and sometimes cycles of recession. But we can take examples from, you know, even medieval squares. Like this one is one in Saffron Walden in England, where a large market square was first like this, and you can compare it to a large parking lot of a mall, for example. And then there were some tactical situations here where tactical urbanism was applied with some temporary market buildings, which finally were transformed into permanent buildings, which shaped the kind of the final wonderful character of this square. So let's hope that sprawl is a form of human settlement which will evolve with time. How were we doing in history? Sprawl repair, this was probably one of the earliest examples I found. This is Leon Krier in 1977. He proposed this retrofit of an intersection, of an interchange, and it's kind of the opposite of what John Norquist and his group are proposing, you know, taking the highway down. Actually, he was taking people up and creating this green archipelago, you know, and then with the views of Athens. This is in Athens, Piraeus. So this is one of the first ones. Then a sprawl repair in 1987. It was like a couple of years, but I just kept the decades. It was in 1986, by the way. This is the first Greyfield redevelopment in the United States, the Mashpee Commons, where a defunct shopping center was turned into a lively town center. Sprawl repair in 1997. This is downtown Kendall, where a big company like GGP actually. I'm sorry, this is downtown Kendall in Miami. And you can see that the visionary buildings, the visionary drawings actually already turned into a reality. And then a sprawl repair in 2007. This is the General Growth Partners project in Utah, where a mall is retrofitted into a main street, and this is one of the main trends. Where is sprawl repair going to be in 2017? We hope that even Houston can be retrofitted and repaired. And actually they're on their way of doing things. I mean, they're doing the grandest new outer loop, but all you can see, all of these dots are possible retrofits of malls and large concentrations of employment and commercial activities which can become future town centers. And of course here close by in Orange County, Florida, sprawl repair along the line of TODs and again interventions in the vintage of Winter Park Village, which is already a mall which has been retrofitted. To talk about sprawl repair and not to think about kind of the whole region, 5 minutes only, great. About the regional picture is not going to lead us very far if we only talk about small kind of incremental interventions, but probably this will be the beginning. You know, the red dots will be the places where the kind of the commercial nodes will be happening. These are the places where the sprawling communities will have a kind of the amenity packages which will help their citizens. And of course we will be taking note out from good places like our urban cores and some of the first-tier suburbs, which were actually kind of benevolent type of urbanism. But we will be going in our sprawling communities and trying to retrofit them. This is an idealized map where you will have kind of overlays of many different things. The potential transit system, heavy rail, light rail, possibly BRT, bus rapid transit, and then circulating buses. This is like the total ideal, where you can capture and create small neighborhood centers, town centers, and even larger regional urban centers. Mall, retrofit mall. This is a kind of a step-by-step which many of you here at the CNU have done already in their practices, how you retrofit the 1,100 malls which will be dying or are already dead, or even retrofitting them while they're still in good shape. This one is an example like this, where you retain the existing structure. The next one, you retain the anchors, but then you create a main street between them. You can see here, and then the streets are feeding into this main street. And then the last one, if in some cases the population goes down, you can have a devolution of the mall into an agricultural village, where you have a lower density around the square, which used to be the food court, and now it's like Piazza del Campo in Siena. Sprawl repair of the strip commercial center. We have of these, Alan Dunham Jones has a great statistic that we have about 50,000 of these all around the country, and 11% of them are empty. And I calculated, but I'm forgetting how much. It was about 5,000 or something. So we have already 5,000 of these dead or more. So, of course, intervening with them and making really great places, great urbanism. And the steps how you do that, you know, it will take a few, you can buy the book and then you can learn how to do it. But it is not so difficult. A lot of it is common sense, you know, how you make streets, and many of us know how to do it. The difficult part will come next with the other speakers. You can even deal with the non-functioning golf course, which may look pretty, but when it goes defunct, it becomes a fallow space, which we have to redevelop, and it can become 3 minutes. It can become a kind of a new neighborhood center. Transformation of single-family subdivisions into villages. This is the most radical and probably the most unusual and a kind of the most outlandish idea. Taking the residential neighborhoods, which are, you know, people bought into the idea of being in these gated communities or a kind of single-use communities, and all of a sudden we are going to be tinkering with their dream. But in case, you know, of the many zombie neighborhoods which are around with a lot of foreclosures and blighted areas, this idea can be not so outlandish after all. Single-use repetitive urban patterns turned into villages. Then why are we doing all of this? It's all about the quality of life. You know, when we add all of the amenities to these neighborhoods, and we reduce the infrastructure, resources, energy consumption per capita, actually overall we are in a better situation. The metrics, everybody's interested in this. Very simple calculations, nothing like spreadsheets or anything like this. It's just when you increase the density in a place, obviously the infrastructure cost per capita goes down. It's as simple as that. Comparisons of carbon footprint. If you want to prove that your carbon footprint is less, that's not difficult to do. And then this is a kind of this is the sprawl composition neighborhood turned into a complete community with a kind of the full range of building types, capturing a lot of the vehicle miles traveled within the community, and of course you reduce your carbon footprint per capita quite substantially, as you can see. I said, oh yes, occupy one cul-de-sac at a time. This is even more outlandish, 1 minute. A cul-de-sac is on my mind because the cul-de-sacs, we have millions, I mean hundreds of thousands of suburban communities, basically residential bedroom communities. And then if you multiply by the number of cul-de-sacs, there are millions of them. So what should we do? Should we even zoom into this place? I mean, this happens to be Phoenix. Is there any chance of doing anything about them? And in my opinion, we have so many of them, and there is such a great number of our population living in these places that we need to do something. It doesn't need to be absolutely radical or extremely difficult to do. The cul-de-sac was created with the very good intentions. You know, this happens to be Letchworth, but the first one was in Hampstead, by the way. Raymond Unwin and Barry Parker, who are the greatest, you know, garden city designers, actually they invented it, but they invented it as one more tool in the palette of urban design. They didn't mean, you know, the Phoenix model where everything is cul-de-sacs and we interrupting the street network, etc., etc. So we have some simple means of dealing with, you know, the connectivity, maybe just proposing a bicycle and jogging connections between kind of in the extra space in the backyards, maybe using small easements between the lots to connect with one-way small streets, whether they're pedestrian or vehicular. And the more radical solution is to basically puncture through the cul-de-sacs and connect them, and maybe you sacrifice one house on each side, but then you gain more houses on the sides. Well, these are just a kind of a little bit exercises on the general. I have 0, but I will just a little, just give me 2 minutes. Connecting the cul-de-sacs. This is the cul-de-sac as it is today. This is much more in character with the Garden City intended cul-de-sacs, where they were closest when they were more pedestrian-friendly spaces. And you can see here that we have proposed the connections for pedestrians and joggers, and then the one with the largest street. Then this was the most interesting portion. Complete the neighborhood module. This is the proposal. You take a cul-de-sac which is at your entrance. You know, usually the collector goes into the arterial and then you have a cul-de-sac, so nothing is connected. You take a couple of the lots on the corner. This can be also somewhere else. The place can be, you know, blighted lots or foreclosed or whatever, some problematic properties. And what you do is basically create a package of the daily amenities which every neighborhood will need. In this particular case, we experimented with a recycling center, a small greenhouse, like a teaching kitchen, also a small diner for seniors, dry cleaner, a daycare, like a package of all post office of the amenities which a neighborhood like this needs. And then you can have a small plaza in the front where it's a gathering place, where your bus can stop in the future. You introduce a median where the extra parking goes. The parking is here. The connection to the cul-de-sac is only pedestrian. You can even isolate it entirely and be only at the entrance so people around the cul-de-sac don't go berserk. But you can also get a connection which is also vehicular. So it's a kind of a very micro and very non-invasive intervention into the cul-de-sac. Live-work units, you take, the previous one was taking only 2 lots. Now this one, you take 1 more lot and you add 5 live-works which can pay for this whole thing, and then you provide some living options for maybe the younger people. So this can be done only with 3 lots, and you can see that the houses are, the live-work units are more or less harmonious with the character of the single family around. Then another module, the supportive living module, or community-based skilled nursing. This is taking one building, and basically this is done to accommodate the needs of our aging population, to create a module where you can plug it in on 2 lots. You can create a place which can be actually served by people who live in the community, and also people can be employed from the neighborhood. On the ground floor can be some retail. Some of the amenities which I showed before are happening on the ground floor, and then we have rooms and a caretaker on the upper floor. This is the building, not very obtrusive to the rest of the neighborhood. This is how it can look. And then another option where we have semi-independent living module with 1-story little cottages around a main facility building. And these are the little senior citizens cottages, which can be also creating a small cluster on the edge of the cul-de-sac. So I will stop because he's harassing me already. But I had a few more, but I believe that the other actually, this is a good introduction to just the physical design portion. And we will go now into the meat of the whole presentation. Thank you very much.
I'm feeling like I'm meanie for doing this, but we're all here, and if you want to see the slides that Galina didn't have a chance to show, then you can come up here after lunchtime, and you can persuade us to do that. Let's see, Joe, full screen, that's not the right one. That's not the right one. Hang on, PDF.
While we're waiting, it looks like from last year, all of the CNU 19 presentations were done, so I imagine the same thing will happen again this year, so just mark it in your mind and go in a couple of weeks.
Give me the jump drive. I don't know how to make it in. Excuse me 1 second, technical stuff. Let's see, that was the question for Galina?
Later.
1 second.
Go ahead and answer your question. I'll take care of this.
Could you repeat the question?
That wasn't a question. She was just saying that they'll be posted online as a matter of.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
No, but if you have questions, maybe we can talk while they fix the thing. Is it fixed?
Okay, hi, my name is Joe Minicozy. It's fun to be the Oh, it's not there. That's interesting. Universe.
Oh, it's because of the way we have it.
It's PDF.
Hang on, I don't know what to do.
There we go.
I'll try, but I think it's because of the way this
But you
is
have
set
to
up.
I got it. Yeah, you do enough of these, you kind of get used to all the glitches. So I kind of consider myself the radiologist following the surgeon. You've got the examples of how you do it, how you do the surgery on the suburban environment. I'm going to talk about what's going on behind that, what you see behind it. I'm going to move fairly quickly through all of this, but I want to start, since my parents are in the audience, I want to embarrass them. I want to talk about how I see cities. And I see cities much like I see DNA. I see the way that you all are. We're urbanists. We go around and see cities that have been around for thousands of years, and we think about how they function. So I'm going to explain human function. This is how I started as a human, right? When I had hair, and my mom put a beret in it. That's kind of nice. And this is how I'm going to end up, right? There's a lot of things I can't choose to change in this path. More importantly, there's a lot of things I can't change in the path of becoming my dad. And there are things that I can change. Now, my father's had a heart bypass surgery, which is genetic to my family, of having heart disease. So what I have to do is eat right, exercise, and do those things to modify my growth. And that's what we have to do as urbanists with cities, is we have to understand that if we want to grow healthily, we have to understand those surgeries that we need to have. So I work with a real estate development company in downtown Asheville. We do selective surgery in the downtown. We do a lot of growth. But what we started analyzing is it was actually good for the community. And now in Asheville, we don't have a whole lot of middle ground. I like to say, I'm sorry, Mark, but we're hippies and rednecks. There's nothing in between. So in the fight of the left and the right, we have to constantly explain ourselves to both sides. And a lot of it's economics. It's the economic questions that we're not asking as designers that we really need to be conversant on, and that's why I'm here today. So I want to ask you all, and I want you all to probe, much like St. Thomas probed Jesus' body, asking the questions about why are we here, what are we doing? And this is what this is all about. So we're going to start with a quick test. And for those of you that I've done this to before, don't shout the answer out. But I'm going to give you 5 seconds to tell me how many shapes. Now, there's a lot of designers here, so you should be good at this. How many shapes do you see in this next image? Ready? Okay. Anyone got an answer? 9? Anyone else? 5, 20? Anybody know how many kids were on the school bus? Anyone? 10? What time was it on the clock? So what I've done is I've shaped your reality by the questions I ask you, right? And what kind of questions are we asking? Are we asking questions about the suburban environment? Did we notice that there's only, 5 kids on the bus? You know, we have been looking without seeing. We have been asking questions without asking the proper question. And that's why this panel is here to talk about the economics. So this is indeed your last chance. Should you not want to hear about economics, there's the door. Please leave. But this is going to change your reality from here forward. So what we talk about is land production. Farmers talk about land on a per acre basis. What goes into the land from a water standpoint, from a fertilizer standpoint, what is the crop yield per acre? The land is the most important part of the equation. And for urbanism and city design, it should be as well. So this is one of our buildings that we rehabbed. Ground story retail, second story office, residential above. We took this building from $300,000 of value to $11 million of value. That represented a 3,500% increase in the community's portfolio. It wasn't our money. That was money in the tax base that rose up. That's the value that our community got out of our work. So we started thinking of that building and thinking of land. Why is it that, like in the Walmart here, this is, by the way, this is my house, my wife and my dogs. My dogs are a little strange. They think they're lions. And we talk about this building here as $20 million worth of tax value. $20 million. Isn't that exciting? Well, I pay $2,000 in taxes. I'm on a tenth of an acre. I'm producing about $20,000 an acre in taxes. When you break the Walmart's tax bill down into the 34 acres it consumed, it's only paying $6,500 in taxes. Now look at our building at $634. If you were an elected official running a corporation called the City of, insert your name here, what kind of cash flow would you want to have in your community? How would you pay for services? So why on God's green earth would you take $6,000? Now you're saying to me, you know, Joe, that's not fair. There's retail taxes. Oh, sorry. There's a little joke here. I was presenting this in California and Colorado, and I said to them, I'm like, hey, y'all, what would you rather grow? Wheat, soybeans, or marijuana? You know, it's legal there, so they kind of got the joke. But if removing me and talking about the tax flow from a retail standpoint, again, the misnomer is we focus on the big number, the $77 million. We don't realize the city only gets a portion of that. So we're only getting 8 cents on the dollar for taxes, and then the city gets 27 cents. It's actually, in the case of Asheville, we're down to, what, 11%? It's ridiculous what cities get, in the case of North Carolina. So the total tax take is $47,000 in retail tax. Add that to the property tax, and that's $51,000 an acre. Just the property taxes from that other building per acre is $330. So why would you take $50,000 when you can have $330? Add the retail tax, now you're cooking with gas, jobs per acre, and then this is a roll-up slide. If Chuck Bull is in the audience, he coined the term for this slide. He called it the Moneyball image. And he hit it right out of the park with that one. I mean, this is the perfect analogy for what this is. When you look at the statistics, all of those other things you start to realize were myths that we're operating under. For those of you who are taking pictures, I can give you copies of this whole thing. So this is how the county's tax acre, this is the other thing that we don't talk about, is what's the county's role in urbanism. So here's our county. This is our taxes per acre coming out of different land use patterns to county taxes. We're just going to remove the city. And you see the city resident, on average, pays more county taxes than a county resident. Now, we like to throw the Biltmore estate in here because it's a pretty easy thing to kick around. They get a great subsidy. You bring the mall into it. Now you see why somebody would do a mall versus residential at $8,000 an acre in taxes versus the $1,000 in residential. And what we said to our elected officials is, why stop there? Why not bring downtown into this? And why not bring our building into this and see what it yields per acre? And then here's the mall here. Actually, do you have an old powerful? So here's the mall, and here's the downtown. Just a 3- and 4-story building does incredibly well compared to the mall. So this is the value, the lesson, the take-home for you all. As you talk about urbanism, you have to understand it makes the community more sense financially to do it. So this isn't scary math. You know, I'm not showing you some sort of thesis on nuclear physics here. This is just really simple division. How many of y'all have seen a millage chart in your community? Anyone? Okay, that's good to see. Oftentimes I run into this, what 20% of the audience has seen a millage chart. This is your cash flow of how your community operates. This is where taxes come from and go to. We should be understanding these things and be facile with talking about them. And I want to bring, everybody's been dragging Jane Jacobs out, I want to drag Lewis Mumford out. You know, if we're not engaging our government, if we're not participating in our government, the way that people in democracies think of government different from themselves is a real handicap. And of course, sometimes the government confirms that opinion. So what is government? And I'll read the bottom line. This is from Webster's Dictionary. Government is the forming of a new corporation. The corporation may be a business, a nonprofit organization, a sports club, a city, or a town. Our cities and our counties are corporations. There's an agreement to pay taxes and have a quality of life. So there's every single square inch of this country is made up of a corporation called a county, and there's smaller corporations inside it called municipalities, where I like to think of the citizen as a shareholder in 2 corporations. We have to talk about the value that we bring to our community. It's all about the money. So when a developer builds this godforsaken place somewhere in Arizona, I hope no one here lives there, but we track all of the costs of all of this, the curbs, the roads, the streets, the buildings, whatever, and then we cost that out to how we sell it. When government brings us into the system and plug it onto the road, do they do the same thing? Do they cost it out? And the answer is no. They don't cost it out. And it wasn't me that was the first person to come up with this. It's actually this guy here with the document called The Cost of Sprawl. We all remember Richard Nixon is hating sprawl, and he's a big environmentalist, right? So we did this work for Peter in Sarasota, where we did his chart, and like they have a bad mall and there's their good mall, and it's this. Just ignore these bottom two bars because it's just obscene. Mixed use is green, single use commercial is red, and blue is residential. This building right here is 4 times the value of the good mall. It's not even occupied on the second floor. If they just spent some time focusing on that second floor, they could boost that thing over $120,000 an acre. So finding this document that the state of Florida did with Jim Duncan, they costed out the land use patterns, and you can get all this stuff online, from the downtown to suburban Fort Lauderdale. The costs, or sorry, Wellington's right here in Palm Beach County. Sorry to the Palm Beach County people, but it's really expensive to house yourselves. But basically, we took 2 patterns that were costed out. So this is the per dwelling unit facility cost. What does it cost to maintain these people once they're in your community? Went into the suburbs of Sarasota and costed out 357 units versus their same peers in the downtown. So this is the land consumption cost. Same number of people, it took 1/10 the land area to house them in their downtown. It costs 57% as much to service them, yet you're making 830% more money. In my world in real estate development, actually in everybody's world in your mortgage and your student loans, whatever, if this is your loan payment, or your loan, that's your payment plan, this is my loan, that's my payment plan, how long does it take for us to pay these things off? It takes 42 years to pay off the suburban development and 3 years to pay off the urban development. Or in real estate development with cost out, income in, and time, the ROI is 18% for the downtown value, and it's a 2% for the burbs. Now, last year at the CNU, Bob Gibbs got all over me. So in year 20, you would have made $34 million off the downtown. You're still in the whole $5 million in the burbs. Now, Chuck's recorders here, Charles Marone kind of hit it on the head with this is the Ponzi scheme, that we can't pay our way out of this stuff. Last year, just for fun, I took the downtown stuff and just said, let's cut the value in half, let's cut the unit density in half, and let's double the value of the downtown just to give it a fighting chance. It's still a 16% return on investment for the urban stuff and a 4% return on investment for the burbs. It just doesn't pay for itself, and this is what we're experiencing with this recession. Taxes drive a lot of this. This is just behavioral economics. In the case of the cost of sprawl was updated, and you see this is the cost of our development growth. This is the revenue. The gap is made up out of permit fees. So when we have a recession, we can't pay for our governments. We've done this analysis all across the country in different states, and we see this stuff time and time again. For every dollar a county resident pays, the city resident's paying $3.70 in county taxes. This is the Walmart, the mall, 2-story building, a 3-story building, this is a 6-story building. It's really simple. As you stack buildings up, as you stack stories up, you're stacking your cash flow. You're getting more revenue out of it. So we think about cars. We don't say, what's the miles per tank on a car, do we? If we did, we'd all be driving Ford F-150s. Instead, we say, what's the miles per gallon, right? I just changed the question. The cars changed, right? No, but the numbers did. So instead, we should all be driving BMW Isettas at 70 miles per gallon. So if we're doing this on a unit that's a $4 module, a $5 module, why aren't we doing it on something that's a $40,000 module? And this is the thing with questions we need to be asking. So, if we're serious about moving this mouse, we need to understand that there's cheese out there guiding that mouse. And we need to understand the systems that are in place to move it. So there are policies that are tipping the scale. Sometimes we in policymaking and government become the problem. And we need to be aware of that we're tipping the scale to a certain form of development. A lot of it is in our assessment patterns. It's not real science. It's just this kind of voodoo. And we need to ask those questions. This is, for an example, this is the Governor's Western Retreat. This is a mountaintop range in Asheville. This is a mountaintop house. 360-degree views on top of a mountain. They even have a tennis court. I think we can all agree this is probably somebody that's wealthy, right? This is the ghetto. This is an area called Burton Street. This is the neighborhood. This is its spectacular grounds of 3 trees. You know, we can all assume that's a ghetto. And here's wealthy, middle-income ghetto, wealthy, middle-income ghetto. You remove the house. Let's just remove the house and just look at the land on an apples-to-apples basis. How is it all valued? Their land is valued at $56,000 an acre on top of the mountain. My land is valued at $161 an acre. The ghetto is valued at $235,000 an acre. Is this fair? This person's got to have water pumped up on top of the mountain. They have to have plows go up there in the wintertime. You know, is that fair? And these are the systems that drive the economic decisions. When we see what's going on out there, just follow the money. So, you know, obviously you need to have your tennis court, right? In the mall, we did this analysis in Cheyenne. This is removing the building, just looking at the land value per acre. This is the mall, and this is across the street. So the land value goes from $15,000 an acre to $35,000 an acre. When I made this presentation, the tax assessor said to me, "You don't understand." And I said, "What don't I understand?" She goes, "Well, the more land you have, the lower the value." Let that one wash over you for a second. You know, would any of us assume that? And I said to her, I said, "Well, you know, in my world, in real estate development world, the more land I have, the more stuff I could put on it." And she goes, "No, you don't get it. That's not our standard." And I said to her, "Well, your standard is driving land consumption. Your standard is driving me to take more of your land out of the corporation, and I get a bonus if I put up surface parking." Additionally, with architecture, there's an incentive for cheap architecture. The reason why it all looks like junk is as a developer, I get a reward, a bonus, for producing that. So let me highlight that. So there's my house again. Here's, let's say, you know, Peter builds a Quonset hut right next door to me. The assessor is going to come out and assess his building at $37 a square foot, and my house is going to be assessed at $128. It doesn't matter that Peter has 10 kids. He has a home occupation where he has trucks showing up every single day. He's not taxed on that. He's taxed on the architectural value, and he's paying $330 in taxes versus my $1,000. Our tax codes aren't written on stone tablets. You know, we've pulled apart zoning codes. We need to get into this stuff and tear that apart. We didn't emerge from the savannah with tax policy. It's not genetic to us. We can work it. In England, you were taxed on windows for 100 years, and people started boarding up their windows, and they threw the tax code out. And we all know the story of France, that the mansard roof was created as a tax loophole. You were taxed below your roof line. And Francois Mansart, an architect, came up with this creative way of sticking stories up there. And he said, "You cannot tax me there. That is clearly the roof." Right? So are we literate about tax policy? You know, who has read the tax code? And I'll read this quote down here from Mark Twain: "A person who won't read has no advantage over one who can't read." And if we're not getting into this stuff, it's our own fault. We have to understand that the modification of why we build things in America is driven specifically by the economic policies that are out there. It's just like developers are like Pavlov's dog. They're just out there because the bell's ringing out there. So, Agent Brown was right. Perhaps we're asking the wrong questions. And we need to be talking about expense and revenue. And if we're serious about changing the shape of our environment and changing the culture of our community and understanding that, we have to understand the financial incentives and rewards that are out there driving it. Thank you.
Okay, now, let's see if I can get the right show open here. Okay, here we are. Hi, I'm back. Okay, there will be a tiny little bit of repetition here from Joe's show. I'm going to try to jump over it pretty quickly. Some of these probably bear repetition. What Joe showed us was an amazing analysis of a situation. What I'm going to try to do is take that analytical thing that we've just learned and perhaps put it into regulation to really put teeth into the concept. So here's, in different graphic format, that earlier information from Sarasota, the community I used to work in, that looks at these phenomena. And of course, I got my house in this slide here on the upper left. And just a kind of what's that about? Okay. Brand new computer, folks. Okay, here we go. I'm going to actually use this. All right, so again, the interesting thing in this picture, the upper right photo, the Walmart, yields in taxes per acre per year about $8,300, only about $150 more per month than my house in the upper left at $8,200. So that was a big surprise to the elected officials in the community I worked in. In fact, when I showed it to them, their jaws dropped. And I thought, foolishly, that from that moment on, they would probably never approve another piece of sprawl development again. No more big box, no more sprawling subdivisions. Silly me. I didn't really think heavily about how a range of concerns affected them, and I'll just leave it at that. And of course, as you can see going down the chart, the bottom three, the 9, 10, and 11, the boxes in the bottom to the right, represent respectively $91,000 for the two-story building built in 1923 that Joe showed us, number 10, a 10-story building built in 1926 as a bank building, today condos, and the lower right, built in the recent boom, a 16-story building bringing in $1.2 million per acre per year. So we're going from the big box store at about $8,300 per acre per year to the new, what most people call a mid-rise building, bringing in $1.2 million, a staggering difference. So, and of course, some folks will ask about the cost side of the equation. Joe showed us the same chart, slightly different graphics, but again, the cost that the county lays out in terms of servicing this new development for the downtown unit, about $9,200, for the suburban unit, about $23,000 to make that unit happen. And of course, that house is probably a little bigger dwelling, but we've already seen its impact on the tax base. Now, Joe showed us this comparison. I want to just dive into it a little more carefully. Let's take 3 downtown buildings in downtown Sarasota, total value $193 million, sitting on just under 2 acres, 197 units, so about $1 million a unit. That's the one example we're comparing to the suburban development out by the highway, 357 units sitting on valued at about $20 million, about a tenth the cost, $20 million, about a tenth the cost of the 3 downtown buildings sitting on 30 acres. Well, what's interesting about this is that in the first year, the downtown properties pay back over 1/3 of the county's infrastructure investment, whereas the ones at the edge pay back only 2%. Roll that forward for the life of the investment, it means that the county is completely paid off in the first 3 years for the downtown buildings, whereas the buildings out on the edge, we're waiting 42 years for that money to come back. And we don't even know if those buildings, these garden apartments, are even going to last 42 years. The mortgage runs about 30 years. But again, the history in a lot of Florida communities, things get bulldozed, plowed under for another use, and of course, whatever value, whatever amount of money the county hasn't gotten back, we're going to be on the hook for that money if the developer comes back to us and says, well, we're thinking of something different for our land here. So the important thing about this, obviously, is really, in physical terms, what it really comes down to is how are we using our infrastructure? How are we getting value out of the county's investment? Now, that road downtown for the new mid-rise building has been in the ground for 100 years. Maybe we plowed a little trench to put a fiber optic cable in. But the fact is that road has moving cars, it has parked cars, it has people eating dinner in sidewalk cafes on both sides of the street, it has waiters earning tips. It's a whole ecosystem of activity that's bringing revenue back to the county, whereas the street on the right, built just a few years ago for those 357 units and those 3 office buildings you see, I stood on that median for about 5 minutes on a Saturday morning and not a single car came by, which tells me that that 5 lanes of infrastructure is not getting a lot of use. Now what's interesting about this is as we step back and think about this globally, not just the dollars, but researchers are beginning to tell us that the kind of cool urban places that we're talking about, that actually citizens, when asked the question, like those places. According to Chris Lineberger, between 30 and 55% of Americans want to live in these mixed-use, mixed-density places. So we have one of these odd situations where it's not only good for tax revenue, in theory it's good for people who want to use these places. In theory, it should be a triple win. As we think about it, the municipalities are building robust tax base, citizens are getting great places to spend time in, and developers are getting higher yield from their land asset, presuming that they owned the land as it went through the entitlement process to change the use. Now, what we've all been talking about up to this point is an analysis, what my friend Ken Snyder would call a decision support system. It's something that should guide the decisions of elected officials and help them set better policy. Now, as I said, the example of Sarasota where I worked is, it caused a momentary gasp, but in terms of long-term policy change, nothing did change, which was very odd to me. But I've only worked in government for about 6 years, and I started when I was older than 50, so I'm learning these things. I believe the only way we're really going to make a change is by moving these ideas into the way we regulate communities, in terms of deciding when people can come forward with an application. Let's create rules that require compliance with smart growth best practices as a way to accomplish this. Now, a lot of people were thinking about how do you define smart growth? Is there some easy, simple proxy for great urbanism that will give us the kind of places that will pay the high taxes? And Alan Jacobs, who wrote the book Great Street, says, well, one thing you could measure to achieve an interconnected street network, which is one of the goals of smart growth, is the number of intersections per X unit of land that offer at least a three-leg connection. So in this image, this famous Dwani Plater-Zyberk image, above the collector road, you see that there are 8 such intersections. And again, the one on the far right, I'm really giving them the benefit of the doubt, because the only place the road goes is towards the parking lot, but whatever. They need every advantage they can. In the traditional urbanism, roughly the same area of land generates 30 intersections. So if the rule said you have to have a minimum of 25 intersections per X unit of land, we'd have a kind of a cool thing. And so the folks that had more than 25, in this case 30, you get your approval, you other people, no, sorry, you got to redesign that and come back to us. Why do this? It'd be a cool thing to do. Why would you do it? You do it because you're trying to achieve a public good. And in the state of California, which is a blue state, Governor Jerry Brown would probably like that. He's all for the public good. And he's often been an advocate for smart growth. The problem is we're in the state of Florida right now. And Rick Scott made a big point during his campaign that he was a guy from the private sector, and he felt we should be running government like a business. And we should focus on the bottom line, make fiscal sense. So really, he should like this sort of thing we're talking about a lot. I haven't tried him on it, but I don't know. He might have. I mean, he was proud of the fact that he didn't take a lot of contributions. And in Florida and California, of course, developer contributions are huge. But what if, in the interest of making fiscal sense, Rick Scott got onto an idea like this? What about the idea that government shouldn't be writing blank checks for developments that don't pay us back for a very, very long time? What if we focused on thinking of these places as an investment and mandate a payback period? What if we set something called a FIQ, or fiscal impact quotient, that basically was the number of years it would take to pay back the government's infrastructure investment? And of course, every municipality would be free to choose their threshold. One county might say 10 years, another 5 if you're really hurting, another might say 20. Again, why should we be writing blank checks? Now, it's probably going to be difficult to hit that target perfectly. So maybe if we said that County A was shooting for 10 years, that's the target. And the goodie that the local officials could say to the developers is, if you can do this in 10 years, we're going to waive all your impact fees. Isn't that great? Let's be free marketeers here. Of course, the requirement is that you pay back in the property taxes, which in many ways are much better because those go into the general fund, and if the government has a strong anti-sprawl policy, they could use that money to fund a transit system or bikeways or things like that. The problem with impact fees is something called a nexus requirement, which force us to spend the money where the impacts are generated, which means that even if you're a smart growth county, you still have to upgrade those intersections out where the big mall got built. And so a lot of people are going to be making the choice to live out there. So in a lot of ways, you're exacerbating sprawl as you complete your road plan. So back to Rick Scott for a minute. He should be happy with this idea of eliminating impact fees until, of course, the developers get a hold of him and say, well, Rick, I'm not sure that's such a great idea for us. But again, there are limits to our ability to forecast these things. So let's say our target is 10. We'll give people up to 15, but between 10 and 15, you would pay down the years through something called adjustment fees. Much like when you don't quite make premier status on your frequent flyer miles, and United gives you the chance to pay, you know, $75 or $100 to stay premier for the next year. So we'll have that option. But it's a cool idea. I still think somehow Rick Scott would find a way not to want to support it. Just a suspicion. But Jerry Brown, on the other hand, who's been a real leader in these things, just might. In California, there's a huge change going underway in planning law to comply with greenhouse gas targets that are some percentage reduction of what we were doing 30 years ago in terms of the amount of greenhouse gases we were generating. And of course, Peter Calthorpe's working on this. I can't help thinking California might be a great place to try this out. They've been very powerful over the years in terms of dealing with things like air pollution. For example, they were the place, the California Air Resources Board, a division of Cal EPA, came up with something called the Corporate Average Fuel Economy Standards back in 1978. And you see this chart. By 1986, the average fuel economy for the big three automakers went from about 20 miles per gallon up to 29 in 1987. So there was a dramatic response. It had national implications. One of the latest things out of Air Resources Board is this sticker you'll find on every car across the country that basically gives you your smog score. It tells you how you're doing in terms of global warming. And it'll basically tell you that the Chrysler 300, you know, might like the styling, but in terms of pollution is going to do way worse than the Prius, which is probably not as good as the Chevy Volt. So essentially, this information is going to tell you which car to buy. Again, it's a decision support idea. I still would like to go tougher. I'd like to see it become a law, become something that actually forced people to do not just advise people as to the better choice. Now, I have a longer presentation that gets into the mechanics of exactly how that works, but I think it would be cool if people, I mean, just as the sticker on the car window tells you which cars emit less greenhouse gases, if you had a sticker on the window of your house that said, well, if you just get rid of that cul-de-sac there and move to the community in the upper right with through streets, you're going to improve X amount. If you have a town center, such as Galena would show you, you improve Y amount. That would be a pretty cool thing. The fiscal impact quotient could do that. It's a new metric. And using, again, cars as the example, when I was a little kid, I loved cars. And I always used to ask my dad all the time, how fast can that Pontiac Bonneville go? And he'd make up a number. He'd say, I don't know, 150 miles an hour. I thought that was really cool. And I was reading books about, you know, the land speed record at the Bonneville Salt Flats. I just thought that was neat as can be. And a lot of people knew about miles per hour. Not that you could really exercise that opportunity, but one day in 1973, people started thinking about a different metric called miles per gallon with the oil embargo. People were lining up around gas stations. And really from that point on, there was a huge change in the way we thought about automobiles, and this new metric of miles per gallon had a big impact. People got very depressed at first about it, and then this cute little car came along to cheer us up called the Volkswagen. The big three automakers tried to create their equivalent, and it took them a very long time to actually get to a point where they were creating cars that really worked well. But nowadays, miles per gallon has become cocktail party conversation. In Washington, D.C., where I live, people talk about their Prius, and, well, my Prius gets better mileage than your Volvo, you know. Anyway, miles per hour is something we rarely, if ever. Does anybody here know how fast does a Lamborghini go? What is the fastest production car? I don't know. We don't care about it anymore because we can't use it anyway. So I would propose that this FIQ could become a powerful thing in terms of determining what development gets approved. But I want to qualify it. I worked in Sarasota County where we had a fiscal neutrality requirement for new development in certain parts of town. And developers would pay a lot of money to consultants who would write these reports. And here's one example that basically said, well, of course, the proposed development is fiscally neutral. But talking to my colleague who works for this company, he said, well, you know, there's a lot of assumptions we base these on. And, you know, sometimes the county, you know, if they really want to get on our case, we'll challenge our assumptions and we'll have a vigorous debate. The problem is that it is based on subjective information, things that could be debated. I think this notion of an FIQ needs to be locked to things that are objective, clear standards that can't really be questioned. Just like the mortgage on your house is linked to the 30-year Treasury bill or the LIBOR, you can look in the New York Times and you can see what those rates are. So, so I really think that by going to a system like this, we might get a powerful change. But again, people say, well, that metric isn't even out there. Well, again, we can think about things like the ecological footprint and all the calculations that go into that, a new metric that folks are trying to promote to help us think differently about our communities. The H+T index at the Center for Neighborhood Technology, where you begin to look at not just housing affordability, but transportation as well, rolled into it, having a huge impact. This presentation today is going to get a lot of you thinking about this notion of a fiscal impact analysis as a screen for developments in your communities. A couple of MPOs around the country have actually developed these. One in the OKI, the Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana, have developed their fiscal impact model. It's fairly simple, but we're here in terms of this process. These models will get more refined over time. One local government may try this. I don't think this has to be difficult to have a real sea change happen. All that really needs to happen in terms of market creation, if we move to discussing this like a business, all it takes is one municipality to adopt a law that requires a certain payback period on the county or the city's outlay. And that will, of course, launch 100 consulting firms to do a product, a fiscal impact analysis for that county that would basically create that model needed to achieve compliance with the law. The appraisers are going to love it because there's going to be a whole lot of work for them to forecast the values. But the reason why I'm here today is to hopefully begin a process where municipalities start to look at these numbers and ultimately to say, why don't we write a law? Why don't we make it easy? And guess what? You're going to get smart growth and new urbanism without ever having to use the term. All those fiscal conservatives out there, people at the far end of the political spectrum who really don't care for smart growth because they think it has to do with Agenda 21, are going to discover that it's going to help their taxes. So anyway, we're all having a great tradition of running over on time. Michael, I don't know where we're at overall, but let me get you queued up to do your show. And again, okay, here we are, Pagano. And there you go. Let's get you into PowerPoint show. Okay.
All right, great. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and learning so much from the panelists. I am not an architect or a planner, so my graphics are very simple, straightforward. I didn't think a spreadsheet would be the right thing to show you. It's better as an eye chart. But what I'd like to talk about is what I refer to as the spatialization of revenue structures. And the interest is derived from concerns about what do local elected officials think about when they think about development opportunities. And they don't think about just I like this notion of the fiscal impact analysis as being one that actually is space determined. It's not just the number of dollars that flow in and the expenses of the project, but it's where that project will be. And so it's sort of blending a notion of what comes out of an interest in space, but also my deep interest in fiscal policy and budgeting and finance analysis. To begin, we should know that, as I think we all do, that cities are unique, and I use that term very carefully. No city is exactly like any other city. There are similar patterns in one way or another, but for the most part, they are unique. And one of the reasons they're unique is that if we look at not just architecture and land use, but also their fiscal architecture, we see that they're quite different. Today, for example, a quick primer on finance, cities generate revenue from three basic sources. One is that they have authority over themselves, which we call own source revenue. Revenue that comes in from other governments, usually from the state government, less so from the federal government. Less than 5% of total city revenues come from the federal government. About 22% comes from the state government. And then that last little portion is debt. But even a debt is a revenue stream that has to be paid out by another revenue stream, which is primarily from own source revenues. I think there is a public perception that for the most part cities are highly dependent on the property tax, so we're really concerned about the property tax. In fact, of own source revenues, cities are highly dependent on user fees. Over 40% of all own source revenue is derived from user fees. Property tax accounts for somewhere around 30% of own source revenue. Sales tax receipts account for somewhere around between 18 and 20%. And income tax or payroll taxes amount to somewhere around a little less than 10%. Nationally, if we count up all the municipalities, of which there are 19,000 plus in the United States, not all, but almost all cities do have the authority to tax property. Not all of them implement that authority. As we know, the largest city in the United States that finally approved a property tax was Mesa, Arizona. Just 3 years ago, had a property tax for the very first time. It's a city of over 400,000 people. But most other municipalities do tax property. Only slightly more than half, around 55% of all municipalities have access to the sales tax, and somewhere under 10% of municipalities have access to the income tax. Almost all of those are concentrated in the states of Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Kentucky, and a few in Michigan, and a few in Alabama, and a few other outliers such as St. Louis and Kansas City in Missouri. New York City, of course, is the largest one, and Yonkers, which I still don't understand why Yonkers. But so if we looked at there we go. So if we look at the map of the United States based on the authority, that is what the states authorize or allow municipalities to have access to, you get a map that effectively says that the red states are those that have access to only one revenue source. And for the most part, the red states are highly property tax dependent states. Except for Oklahoma. Oklahoma actually is highly sales tax dependent. It relies on the property tax to retire debt, but otherwise general operations are paid for from the sales tax. And then the yellow states have the cities in the yellow states have some combination of property and income or property and sales. And the green states, and this is a bit disingenuous, in the state of New York, there are only 2 cities that have access to the three revenue sources, New York and Yonkers. In Missouri, again, only 2 cities, but again, these are the largest, so they generate a lot of municipal revenue in those states. And Washington has something called a business and occupancy tax, occupation tax, which is something like a gross receipts tax, and it relies quite heavily on that, and the sales tax and the property tax. So we get some rather diverse sets of cities within these municipalities, within these states. And if you look at their reliance, the red states or cities within the red states are fairly reliant on just one tax source, and the green ones on more than one. This is from 2007 data. So now that we've established that all municipalities have a very different fiscal architecture, so what difference does it make? Well, what I'd like to, we're plugging books. Mine's a very old book. It's called Terra Incognita, when the Franca Lingua was Latin. It's the 2004 book. The idea, here we're trying to map out, if you were an elected official and you see that there is a development opportunity, where would you place that development opportunity? And part of the answer is influenced by assuming that this is a new community and you don't have history and traditions that have determined the kinds of actions you've taken in the past. Where would you place different activities? If your incentive as a municipal official is to maximize revenues, maximize resources into your treasury, and to minimize costs, where would you place development activities? So a city that's highly dependent on the property tax would have a whole lot of interest in making sure that the city investment activities would take place primarily in the center of the city. And the reason for that is the higher the value, the more revenue collected by the city, and if it does induce other kinds of development near it, then the city can capture the growth in property rates or property values because of that investment by the city, and the city keeps all of the tax revenues. If you located a development activity, a high-income development activity on the edge of the city, I think I can use this thing, maybe I can't, yeah, on the edge of the city, then you are investing for a nice person, you're investing for your neighboring municipality and not for you, because you can't collect all of the returns on the investment because your neighbor is, because they have access to the property tax as well. So you're incented really to put most of your high income, residential, commercial, anything in the middle of the city, and the very low end residential around it. You also want to put the cost activities on the edge of the city. So you put your commercial and industrial zones to the edge of the city, not because it's far away from people, which may be an important characteristic of the city, but also because you're spilling costs over to your neighbor as well. You have congestion costs, you have other kinds of travel costs that you can now export to your neighbor, not to make them happy, but that's the reality. That's what you would want to do. Minimize costs and maximize expenditures. And I don't know what happened there.
Go one more.
Ooh, I'm going backwards, that's why. Okay. So, what do cities want to do? Cities want to think strategically about development based on the market value of the development and the possibility of shifting service costs to neighboring communities. As I said, I am not an artist or an architect, and thank God Steve Price is. So, is Steve in the room? He's not here. Thank you, Steve. Steve sort of took the ideas and said, well, what does this mean in his mind as a great designer? And he said, look at this. This is sort of the, let me get the right button here. This one right here. This is what the city would look like. The red signifies where investment activity is, where cities would like to invest, and the characteristics are because there's a concentric urban structure with property tax cities, there's a physical and historic identity to the city, and the high-end residences and offices are located closer to the city. Now, that kind of design, that kind of urban design, is not characteristic of municipalities that have a sales tax reliance. Sales tax reliance encourages municipal officials to behave based on the same behavioral economics, based on the same kind of motivations, but spatially the placement of the kinds of activities that they're looking for is quite different. Spatially, what they're looking for is to place shopping malls, and again, there's very little concern about residential housing. Residential housing does not generate very much property tax revenue for cities that are dependent on the sales tax. So it's not the value of the property or residences you're worried about. It's about the number of dollars that are being bought and sold within your municipality. So if you can place those commercial developments near the edge of the city, you've accomplished a really important thing, and that is you've been able to export your tax burden to your neighbor, because the size of the shopping sheds exceed the boundary of the cities. So the larger the shopping shed, the more you have your neighbors in these other cities paying for paying sales tax to your city, so that you can provide services at a lower cost to your residents than you would if all of the property or sales taxes were within the municipality's responsibility. So, thinking strategically about what sales tax dependent municipal officials do is that they think about the development based on the mental constructs of the shopping shed and on which transactions are taxable. So it's important that the shopping sheds include taxable transactions, which of course, as we also know, nearly 60% of the consumption dollar is spent on services which are not taxed, so this model gets all messed up in the service industry. And again, Steve did a terrific job of putting together another view of what the city might look like, this up here, where the clusters of commercial development are really toward the edge of the cities, and what is left in the middle of the city, tax dollars are drawn across city borders, but the development pressure is at the edge, and the urban center, as a consequence, languishes. We'll skip that one. And finally, those that are income tax dependent. And again, there are very few municipalities in the United States that are income tax dependent. In fact, there aren't really any that fit any of these three ideal types. But those that are income tax dependent tend to be in the state of Ohio and nowhere else. Even though Pennsylvania has a lot of municipalities that have access to the wage tax, they aren't nearly as dependent on the wage tax as Ohio municipalities are dependent on the municipal income tax. And in Ohio, which I'll use as the illustration here, because in Ohio the income tax is levied at the place of employment and at the place of residence, it doesn't really matter that you have high-income residential zone located outside the city, so long as these people are working downtown in your city, because you collect tax revenue from them. City of Cleveland, for example, generates over 60% of its municipal income tax from non-city residents, in other words, commuters who are coming into the city to work in downtown Cleveland. What it encourages in terms of urban design is just to make sure that you have a lot of high-income people living within your municipality so that you can tax their income. And I'm not as convinced of what urban design looks like in a city that is highly income tax dependent. So they think about the development on the basis of the income growth potential of the individual or the firm. And I think, as Steve correctly notices here, is that development is less formulaic for income tax dependent cities. Where you invest really doesn't much matter so long as you're attracting high-income high-income individuals into your municipality. So the point of all of this is to illustrate that it depends, cities are unique. It depends on what the tax structure or the fiscal architecture of a municipality is, and that will influence or incent a certain type of behavior on the part of the municipal officials. Clearly their attempt is to increase tax resources and to decrease expenditures for their municipality, but that has a spatial implication. The spatial implication for property tax cities is to ensure that high-value investment is in the center of the city. For sales tax dependent cities, it's that development, commercial development, taxable commercial development is located near the fringe of the cities, and the center of the city is less important, and residential development is less important as well. And income tax cities are a little, in my mind, a little bit unusual. I'm not quite sure how to place it. The point is that there is a spatialization to the revenue structures, the fiscal architecture of American cities. Thank you.
Michael gets the gold star for being on time. Thank you. Thank you. Now, I'm not sure quite where that leaves us. I probably don't want to remind you of the fact that we are now actually slightly past the time. We said we'd close. I'm sure lots of you have questions, though. The panel is very happy to continue to roll forward into Q&A. The one thought I want to leave you with, years ago when I first got involved with the new urbanism movement, as I said, I was attracted to design. The first few communities were produced in a policy framework that was, people wanted to see what these places looked like, so they got done by hook or by crook. Seaside Florida is in a place that had very little regulation. Celebration, Florida, of course, the Disney company practically owned the government in the Reedy Creek improvement areas, so they made it happen the way they wanted it to happen. Places like Kentlands came in on a PUD. We thought that the policy structure didn't really matter that much. We'll make these places work. It's about physical design. Not true. After 20 years, after 6 years working in local government, I have come to realize that the policy structure in America has moved about 2 degrees, while the favored model has moved 180 degrees. We still have rules that are about producing and subsidizing sprawl. So with that, please start firing your questions to the panel, and let us know who you are. Are there mics anywhere here? You're going to have to stand up, shout it out, and I'll repeat it. Sure, in the flowered shirt back there.
Paul Tischler, retired Tischler Vice. I just wanted to do a lot of fiscal impact stuff. And one thing that I think you should consider is the possibility of disinvestment in jurisdictions where if you have this higher density design, suddenly calculate some of the plus of what you're avoiding by losing. We did something like that in Raleigh. It was very
By the way, pleased to meet you, Paul. And this man is a very notable person in the history of American planning, having been instrumental in the defining of impact fees and crafting a lot of the best fiscal impact models, I believe, to deal with them. So, Joe, do you want to take that on, or Michael?
No, I think
Could you repeat the question? Was it a question, or was that a...
Was it a question or a okay, comment. Okay, other questions? Yes, and belt it out.
I'm Mark Maxwell, city manager for a small town in Texas, and this is powerful stuff. But I really need to use your slide presentation so that I can show this to my city council so that we can adopt the law that you referenced without any eyes. I could try to reinvent the wheel with my own presentations, but yours are more powerful.
I'm happy to lend you the slides, but I'm also happy to jump on a plane to come down and make the message, make the...
Take you up on it.
Okay, very good.
And also, two of you had some very good graphics regarding tax revenues per acre. But fully half of our city's revenue comes from utilities, water and sewer fees, and that'd be an interesting metric to include as well. Thank you.
Again, I have these, the chart is in this publication from New Urban News. I've got some copies of and can send PDFs of. Way back, yeah, you, pardon me. Shout it out.
Well, again, as Dr. Pagano mentioned, it depends on the city. In the cities that I've experienced, for the most part, they're either retail tax dependent or property tax dependent. They didn't necessarily have employment tax that was significant around the radar screen. It'd be interesting to run that analysis and see that, and see what the employment sector density is. Downtowns, people locate their jobs downtown because of the efficiency of commerce. Being around other offices, having an attorney's office down the street, things like that. So you will find the ghettoization of jobs in a downtown of a higher employment sector. So maybe perhaps those numbers would look similar, but I haven't done that analysis.
Other questions? Wave in, gentleman standing up in the back. Thank you. And again, all of us, I believe, do consulting in various forms, and probably all have business cards with us today. So we're happy to go and do that. What surprises me about all this is that it took so long to figure it out. A friend of mine, Chris Nelson, out at the University of Utah, has been teaching real estate and related subjects for decades. And I asked Chris, who's had many, many talented grad students go through his program, I said, has anybody ever done this kind of analysis before? And he said, no, it's too simple. You can do this in your community in about 45 minutes. Just get on the tax assessor's website, download the amounts people are paying for various parcels, divide the total number by the acreage. There's a bit of storytelling that goes with it, and for that I think Joe does a great job. Other questions? Hands up. Right up here. Stand up, belt it out so that everybody in the room can hear you.
Would he have meant too simplistic? I'm not saying that it is, but is that the case? And the reason I'm saying is that I recently was talking to a few students, and they asked me why I was presenting architecture, good architecture, bad architecture, and they said, well, if good architecture is so good, why do we still continue to do so much bad architecture? And I didn't have an answer. The answer is like the 99% that give a bad name to the rest of us. So the question is, if this is so self-evident, why aren't we doing it? Why aren't we, and you touched on that it's a matter of fiscal incentive, but is it just that?
Is it, everybody heard the question is if this is so simple and self-evident, why isn't everyone doing it?
Well, there's a big line between simple and simplistic. It's a Post-it note is a simple thing. Somebody figured out how to put glue on the back of a piece of paper. Are they a rocket scientists for doing that? No. This is a really simple way of looking at things. But I think it takes understanding that there is, in every policy, whether you like it or not, you are tipping the scale in a certain direction. And if you can accept that and say these are powers that are within the system, they're going to drive shape of city and decisions in architecture and all of that. But you have to be first willing to say that cheese is out there. And I think in architectural terms, in my education, we're completely oblivious of it. So, you know, I figured it out working with a real estate developer because we were writing checks for $40,000 a year to the city of Asheville, and we wanted to know what we were getting for it. So.
If I could just jump in, I know nothing about architecture, but I do know that if you're dealing with elected officials who come from the general populace has no idea what level of government provides what services. So the information on property tax here, this was property taxes to the city and property taxes to the county. There was nothing in there about property taxes to school districts, or in the Northwest, or excuse me, the northern states in the United States and the Northeast, to townships as well, because they all have property tax levying authority. And it's the complexity of the American federal system that's making most, I would argue, would make most of the voters and the elected officials confused.
And one other thing to mention, much of what we focused on here is the revenue side, and the disparities on the revenue side are so dramatic that there's almost nothing on the cost side that's going to bridge them, truly. And again, if you think about it, that mid-rise building in a downtown, your biggest municipal cost is likely to be schools. And that downtown building is likely to be generating relatively few households with schools. But sometimes the value is to extract one single thing. A lot of time, most of the questions and criticisms that come back to us have to do with the complexity of the cost analysis, the kind of work that Mr. Tischler's firm is incredibly skilled at doing. What we did is we said, we can't compete in that arena. We're just going to think about one single metric and understand it. And that's where the breakthrough came, was by isolating that variable. So. Other questions? Woman?
Somebody for a very long time.
Who's this gentleman?
Yeah, our company owns and operates shopping centers, and I'm attempting to, in one particular town, we have a town center opportunity adjacent to, one is a traditional strip, well, actually both traditional strip malls. And as I look at the sprawl repair thing that you talked about, Galena, I say, well, we have, you know, in a sizable investment that's cash flowing, and all of the physical modifications that you talk about, I'd love to do every one of them, and yet I have to somehow make the argument that supports the substantial investment in either scraping and or rebuilding properties that are cash flowing perfectly fine. These are not vacant, they're not dilapidated, they're not distressed. And so the process of getting from A to B is a very difficult one to justify to investors. Curious about how you deal with that.
Well, I mean, sprawl repair is not applied only to dilapidated properties or something which is already dead. Actually, there are already examples all around the country where communities have decided to basically redevelop shopping centers or even malls, for that matter, to make something better out of them, you know, at the level, at the moment of the presence. You know, for example, the Downtown Kendall project, which I showed, I mean, it was done in 1998, a long time ago, when the mall was still thriving. Actually, for that matter, it's still thriving. But nevertheless, you know, the underutilized parking lots around it created the opportunity for further development and for people to come in and do business and create the opportunity to create amenities for the rest of the residential neighborhoods around. What you need to do is probably see whether you have the market, for affordable housing around. Affordable housing meaning housing for younger people, senior housing, you know, things which you're missing in your community. You can plug in your empty parking lots and make it a win-win situation for the people who are within, you know, the tenants in the current buildings. You will create for them more customers, and you will create more amenities for the people living around the residential communities. So it's on a, of course, community by community basis. You have to do the homework of defining what you need, what is missing, and plugging these particular elements.
I'm going to suggest, because we're over time, it's wonderful that there's still so many of you in the room, but those of you who do need or want to get to lunch, I'm going to suggest you all head out. Folks that are interested in kind of staying in formal Q&A, come forward, so we're not filling the whole huge room. Again, the panel's happy to continue, but just for those of you who want to head out just to eliminate the disruption, feel free. Again, I have copies of these which I'll walk over to the door so we don't need to disrupt. And again, anybody who wants to leave a business card for any follow-up, please feel free to do so. So I'm going to attempt to do that, and again, those of you who want to stay, feel free to stay, but move forward. Okay, we're going to restart in about 30 seconds here. Thank you. So you're the Texas? Yes. Here, here's my card.
Yeah, I was in Texas. Let me get some more cards. There's another one starting in 15 minutes.
Oh, there is? In 15 minutes? Okay, we'll tie up. Okay, we're going to restart in about 10 seconds. So I'm told we only have about 15 more minutes in the room, but that should do it for the next questions. That's not available at this time, but it may be. Yeah, there are places on the web you can find it. What's that? FAC?
And I didn't mean to offend with a simplistic comment. I think it's brilliant. And it's just that the perception, because it's so simple.
I'm going to ask everybody here to, well, could I ask the people in the front to sit down just for, I think, I want everybody to have the benefit of the questions that get answered.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's it. And there's,
My name is Mayor McGee. I'm not city of New York.
oh, great.
Because this will.
Did you get a card?
Yes.
Okay, and which city?
City of Benita Park.
Okay, we're going to reconvene now. If everyone could please take their seats, we'll continue with questions.
Okay, you just email me and let me know. And just remind me.
Hi. Okay, there we go. All right, any more, next question, please. Yes.
For Elena, sorry, just thinking about the theory behind the sprawl repair manual, and I've already got the book, so I'm
Thank you.
minimally informed anyway, but we're looking at ways to use TDR in an already built-out area with no greenfields to transfer those development rights. But we are looking at ways to possibly use failing or underutilized strip malls as receiving areas. Do you think that the sprawl repair manual would be able to set that up a little bit better if I were to dive in a little bit more? Has there been any instance of using it in a transfer of development right type of scenario?
Did you say that you have greenfields or you don't have greenfields? You don't.
I'm not looking to subsidize for wetlands. I'm just looking to revitalize areas that are on their way to declining.
All right. Well, it will be important to find where your, basically your, which areas will be the giving areas. So this will be the interesting situation. We are over-retailed and we have many more commercial properties than we need. So I don't know what is your particular situation, but maybe looking at the larger regional scale, kind of the larger picture, and identifying. Oh, that's that's pretty regional. Sounds pretty regional. So it's. You have to probably identify the ones which may not be appropriate for redevelopment in the future and do this transfer of development rights to the ones which have the more potential, maybe which are an infill situation where there is built residential stuff all around. You have to probably create criteria for your place, how to do that. But I personally don't know examples like this where they have used TDRs from one commercial property to another, or, for example, even from residential properties. But that's a very interesting question because we have on the fringes of our communities more and more of the residential neighborhoods actually are just deserted in some cases. We haven't seen, kind of 100% desertions, but, stories from Fort Myers here, in Florida and other places in Arizona and in California, which are basically the zombie subdivisions. Maybe some of these property rights can be transferred to the nodes of redevelopment. But that's a very interesting.
Actually, in West Palm Beach, we had a situation here with TDR. Now, luckily, we had a form-based code in place, so we had a volumetric density of what we knew was going to be there. Unfortunately, a good deal of downtown north of the street over here was 5 stories, which is fine, but what do you do when you have a church or a 2-story building that's historic, or you want it to be historic, but you're zoned 5 stories? So we actually gave them the ability to detach that zoning volume. We didn't care about the use. So whatever the market was. So it's actually worked very fast and very quickly in the marketplace. There were several churches that refused to historically designate their church because they saw sometime in the future when they might not be there, and they didn't want to hamper the property. But giving them the ability to sell off that real estate only after they historically designated that building gave them the cash flow and the resources to fix that building. So it actually worked very well in West Palm Beach. I'll talk about it a little bit tomorrow. I think it was a couple million square feet of real estate that transacted in the free market. And there were plenty of developers of taller buildings that are taller than 8 stories in downtown, a good deal of them tacked on that extra volume. It was a win-win-win. We kept the density in downtown, which is what we wanted. They got money, and everybody got the building saved.
Could I just add, it's a compelling idea if you have an urban growth boundary like Portland, Oregon, or any city in Oregon, then you could potentially transfer development rights from what would be an expansion area, because it's always required to expand into shopping centers and retrofit.
I think we got time for maybe 1 or 2 last questions. Gentleman in the striped tie.
I love the idea of the FIQ as a metric, and I'm wondering if there may be an unconventional consequence in a community where their downtown or urban properties will have high legacy costs or may require brownfield redevelopment, if that would steer some of the development unintentionally towards more of an edge condition or urban condition with higher costs.
You say higher legacy cost. Explain that a bit.
Oh, if they may require more commitment to the city, a higher commitment to the city up front, in terms of as an active agent in brownfield development. Just in terms of the cost for the fiscal cost coming up front, the commitment to the city might be higher for urban development. That changed the quotient.
I'm not sure. I mean, there are some weird glitches. I mean, certainly waterfront buildings that have a high value that end up blocking buildings behind them. You need to somehow correct for that. If a building is creating the Death Star effect on nearby development, you need to have some provision. And again, that's a reminder that planning's still important. You know, if you think of it as sort of 3 circles, the regulatory doesn't really change. What you're really doing is you're tinkering with the typical financial incentives, but you're making it much simpler and much more objective. But the other thing is, buildings, huge buildings on top of big parking podiums, where the parking podiums tend to clobber the street. So you need to make sure that your regulation, that your planning isn't promoting certain building types that have the Death Star effect, that create high value but clobber things around them.
I'd like to play on that a little bit. There's always unintended consequences in policy. The key is being fast on your feet to adapt for them. When FDR proposed the New Deal program, he was basically shouted at Congress, and he basically said, well, we got to try something, because what we currently have doesn't work. And I think we're in a similar situation. We've just come out of a pretty ridiculous recession that we all know could have been avoided, and we know that the system has to change. So let's try something, let's see if it works, and if it doesn't work, you modify and adapt. Going back to that picture of my parents, there are cities that have been around tens of thousands of years, and what are we learning from them? How have it's an invention of human beings. As hairless apes, we've made these things as our home. So how do we make them work better? And as long as we're just astute to the numbers, we can constantly adapt policy, and that's just what it's going to take.
Okay, I think in deference to the next group coming in, we probably should vacate the room. Again, this is a hardcore group. We're happy to stand outside the door here and continue to answer questions one by one. And if there are specifics of your community, we're happy to suggest to the best of our ability how we might deal with it. Let me thank the panel, Galina, Joe, and Michael. Michael, again, for coming to join us for for this panel. Really, I'm excited to watch these ideas begin to spread and get traction. And hopefully, if any of you do have an interest in trying some of these notions out in your community, I, for one, would be happy to help out in any way I could to see some of these ideas get tried. Thank you very much.